Happy Monday. Thank you for joining me for this week's Unlocking the Magic of Leadership. Now, last week we talked about how we can slow down so that we can move fast. In week 2 of our series, we're going to be talking about how you can say it and do it. It's really critical as leaders that our employees know that when we say something, we're going to follow through and our actions will match our words. We've all met that person that they say that they're going to do something.
And then you're like, yeah, okay, I know, okay.
And it gets to the point where you're not really surprised anymore when they don't do it. There's a lack of trust there. And so if we're not aligning what we say with our actions, our employees aren't going to trust either of them. So I made some notes for this video because I wanted to make sure that I got it right. And so as we're going through and we're thinking about it, it's really understanding how can we communicate before we act, not after. So this isn't possible in every single scenario, right? I go back to when COVID happened. There were so many changes. It was happening across the board between what was expected legally in organizations, and states were changing laws minute by minute. And so there wasn't that time to explain the why. But when there is time to explain the why, which is the majority of the time, it's how can we communicate the why behind what we're doing before we roll out the change? Because as humans, we need to know our why. I may not agree with how something is done, but if I understand the why and I can get behind the why of why we're doing what we're doing, then I'm more likely to get on board. And when our executive team is rolling things out and they share with us the why, it makes it easier for us to be able to have the conversations with our employees when we're rolling it out. Now, as many of you have heard, I worked at Disney in 2012 when we were rolling out the Magic Band. It was part of a very large rollout program called My Magic Plus. And I'll never forget, it was a beautiful experience in change management because our executive pulled a meeting with all of the frontline leaders. So we had to choose different meetings throughout the week. And we went in and they told us a story, a before and after story of what was the guest experience like now, and then what was it going to be like when My Magic Plus rolled out. And by creating that before and after, it really got us excited about being a part of My Magic Plus because we understood the why. And it made it worth it when we were in the midst of the chaos and the struggles and stuff not working the way that it was supposed to work and guests being angry. We were able to keep that why in place. And so when we're thinking through why we're making decisions that we're making, then sharing and articulating that can be really helpful to get those that need to actually do the work on board. And so when we think about Trump's presidency so far, we can see a couple of different examples of when the why hasn't been shared. So the why behind the federal layoffs, that was a big one. People were and are still wondering, am I going to have a job? Am I not going to have a job? What does this look like? There's all of this angst. And what happens when people are experiencing that level of mental angst? Y'all, they're not getting anything done because all of their mental energy is going into trying to figure out what happens next. And there's a lot of energy going into trying to find out, is it even legal? Can he do that? And so when we're considering it, understanding and communicating before and not after can slow a lot of these unintended consequences down. Now, the next is being consistent in messaging across channels. And this is one thing that we're seeing throughout the government across the country and in many states is the different branches of the government don't really understand what's going on. There's not been a lot of clear communication as these sweeping changes have been going into effect. So an example of this is the executive order to get rid of all DEI training, the verbiage around DEI, and then hinting at the potential that organizations could be held legally responsible while still including DEI training if they're not willing to change their messaging and if they're not willing to go against values that they hold and believe are critical. And so you have a lot of organizations that are asking their lawmakers, hey, what's happening? And you're seeing lawmakers in town halls where the citizens are like, hey, what's happening? And the government officials aren't able to clarify it because they don't know. They're getting mixed signals, mixed communication, just like we're getting mixed signals and mixed communication about all of these changes as well. So when we're thinking about leadership, especially during times of change, it's important to be consistent in your messaging because as humans, we need to hear things multiple times. Saying it just one time generally doesn't get the results that we're looking for. So we have to be able to say it multiple times, saying the same thing but in multiple ways, whether that's through social media or through your intranet, your organization's intranet, through a weekly newsletter that you have, and then in meetings. Disney was extraordinary with this when we worked there. They would give us tools to be able to say the same thing in 20 different ways across 20 different platforms and have consistent messaging for not only the cast members, but for us leaders that were trying to convey that messaging. By ensuring that we knew what to say, they were able to make sure that the message went across 80,000 people, which for an organization, that is massive. And being able to get all of those people on board with the change required consistent messaging. And then third and final tool is if there is a mistake, something's happening, something's not working the way that you want it to work, own it and clarify. That's the thing about making a lot of changes is most of the time, the very first change doesn't go so well. It's not going to roll out in perfection. We know that as humans, we can accept that something is not perfect if we trust the people that are asking us to do the things that they're wanting us to do. And so if you are rolling out massive amounts of communication to federal employees and there's been a lot of confusion, own up to it and say, you know what? This wasn't the best way to roll out this information. We could have done it a lot better. Moving forward, this is what we're going to do to be able to rectify the situation. By owning those mistakes, having clarity, being able to look and have the humility to understand when maybe your plan went a little bit off kilter can be really helpful for maintaining the relationship that you have with your employees. All right, so to make sure that we all know, we are looking at being able to say it and do it, aligning our actions with our communication. And the 3 tips that we have for that is communicate before acting, not after. Be consistent with messaging across channels. And if you make a mistake, own it and clarify so that the individuals know what next steps look like. All right. Thank you very much for joining me for this week's Unlocking the Magic of Leadership. I hope you have an absolutely amazing week. And I know that a lot of the changes that are coming are challenging and scary. And there's a lot of people out there still fighting the good fight. So you're not alone. Don't forget, we got this. I'll see you next week.